Vex King, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just so ecstatic to have this conversation with you. I love deep conversations. I read your book, Closer to Love. I knew from reading the book that you were a deep thinker, and I knew that I wanted to dig into the nuances within this book. So, first of all, thank you so much for making the time today.
Thank you for having me. And we're speaking on a Sunday, so most people are usually relaxing or,
Right.
sleeping in. So thank you for making the time and having me on.
Absolutely. I want to start the conversation off with I read that you were homeless for 3 years. Your dad passed. You dealt with racism. You dealt with poverty. And I think during those years, in your younger years, you got really familiar with, I would say, pain and suffering. And I want to know, what has pain taught you about love?
That's actually a really, really good question. So, as you rightly said, my whole childhood was difficult from the get-go. My dad passing away after 6 months of me being born. Um, I suppose from then, that very point, my family's life kind of went downhill. There was a constant struggle. So I've got two sisters, and my mum and my two sisters and me, we were homeless roughly for 3 years of that time. And then eventually, when we moved into a home that we could call ours, we weren't really wanted there. So we faced a lot of racist abuse, there was a lot of violence, and then poverty seemed to be like a main theme throughout my childhood and my teenage years. And I think I felt a lot of pain from these experiences, whether it was physical, psychological, or emotional pain.
Mhm.
That pain was inevitable. And I know there's this quote that says pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. I like to reframe that and say that pain is the feeling and suffering becomes the response. But it's how do we carry that pain forward in our life? The suffering happens within ourselves. It's our own thoughts. It's how we're looking at the world and perceiving it. But what pain especially has taught me about love is that I follow a lot of Buddhist philosophy and Hindu philosophy. And a lot of the kind of key ideas with especially those religious beliefs is that we can liberate our souls. We don't have to suffer. But at the same time, especially Buddhism, it says that just existing as a human being, there's always going to be suffering,
Mhm.
right? Like suffering is just a part of being human.
Mhm.
And most of the suffering actually doesn't happen externally. The suffering happens within ourselves. It's our own thoughts. It's how we're looking at the world and perceiving it. And that's why suffering then becomes the response. But what pain especially has taught me about love is that pain's going to be there. It's always going to happen in some way. Love is always present. It's always within me. There's all these ideas in society that love exists outside of us.
Mhm.
And the love doesn't have to be romantic love. It can be family, it can be friendships, but it can also be love for like poetry, music, love for money, because people love money as
Yeah.
well. When you think about where love is coming from, if you win the lottery today, and you've got the winning like lotto. I think you call it the lotto in the US.
Yes.
But if
Yeah.
you've got the winning lotto ticket, the ticket doesn't provide love. That feeling of love that you're experiencing is happening within you. It's always there. It's always present. But what pain does, when we experience pain, we create stories about our life, about who we are. And a lot of the time, we use that pain to create this wounded ego identity. Suddenly, I am what my pain has told me I am. But our true nature is beyond the pain, it's beyond the ego. It's this ball of light that exists within us. And to me, that nature, one of its attributes is love. And although pain will happen and we will experience suffering, what I've learned throughout my years is that I can always return to love by going beyond the ego, beyond the stories and the narratives that pain has created. And I can return to love because it's always present within me. It's almost like things happen in our life. They create very painful memories, painful experiences, and it almost like creates clouds. And the sun is love that's always there. It doesn't change, it doesn't move. It's just constantly shining. It doesn't pick and choose who it shines on. It's just there, equal for every single person.
Mhm.
But all these clouds just kind of obscure that sunshine. And I think everything that I went through in my life that created pain blocked that love. And it wasn't until I really went on this kind of self-love journey deep within myself that I made the realization that that love was always there. And all I had to do is navigate through these clouds and
Mhm.
realize that these clouds weren't even who I was. They were
Mhm.
just things that society might have taught me about who I was, or things that I downloaded from experiences and then created a character out of to define who I was. But actually, beyond all those fleeting things that were happening in my life and those experiences, that there was this core, and that was a truer reflection of who I was deep down.
That's really interesting because, so let me take it back. Say you experienced someone says something racist to you on the steps of your home, for
Mm.
example. How do you then see the sun that is love beyond the clouds? Do you
Mm.
have to detach yourself from believing what they say?
It's such a very difficult concept, and I think a lot of people will struggle. And even to this day, I'm only human. I feel like when we talk about love, we're talking about this oneness, this thing that connects us to everyone else, and we're all part of the same existence. And then in our human form, in the physical world, there's duality, like there's light and dark, hot and cold. And as human beings, we have limits because of duality, right?
Mhm.
Where there's light, there's going to be dark. Where there's suffering, there's also going to be some form of liberation. In a moment when you face racism, I'll take it back to when I was younger. I'd step outside of my house, I'd have a ball, and we didn't have much money. So, I really treasured this ball that I used to play with. And I was just minding my own business, trying to like kicking the ball around. And then suddenly there's 10 kids outside of my house, and they're all telling me I don't belong there and that I need to get back home.
Mhm.
So from those interactions, especially as a young, impressionable child, I feel like I'm not accepted by people, that I
Mhm.
don't belong in this place. I won't repeat some of the things that they said, but
Sure.
I also get other remarks about who I am. And suddenly I'm viewing myself, through their lens. And I'm creating this identity based on what they say that I am.
Right.
And I can grow up and really nurture that identity, not realizing that it's actually come from someone who probably didn't love themselves,
Mhm.
then projecting their fears and insecurities and their lack of probably education as well on me. And then
Mhm.
I've created my life based around that. Now, returning to this source of love and this ball of light, it's a journey in itself. And I think sometimes you'll go through your whole lifetime and you'll never even experience that subjective experience of that ball of light. But one thing that's really helped me realize who I am is in Buddhism, basically, it says that everything's kind of transient in nature, everything changes. In that way, we can actually show more gratitude for our life, because if everything's going to change one day, then in the moment, you can show more gratitude for what you have. And
Mhm.
if you're feeling sad, you can also have faith in the future, because you can realize that sadness is also temporary and it can be replaced with something far more greater. But everything, including our thoughts, emotions, even our body, is transient in nature. So things are always changing, like our body is going to grow old, our emotions are going to change. Even the thought I had 5 seconds ago has changed, and our minds are so busy, we're constantly changing onto things. But what I think a lot of us do is that we attach to certain things. And when we create these attachments, we try to control situations.
Mhm.
What I've certainly done, and that's helped me over the years, is that I realized that everything is transient in nature. The only thing that's guaranteed in life is change itself.
Mhm.
But beyond that, there's this awareness that's always there. And life really isn't about trying to hold on to these things, it's just about experiencing them.
Mhm.
So when I go into an interaction, and even to this day, I might not get as much racism, but someone might not like one of my books, or they might not agree with a social media post, or they might not like how I look, or something crazy. But they might leave a negative remark, and it's very weird that I realize that even that remark is not mine to own. It's transient. It exists for a moment,
Mhm.
and then that moment's gone.
Mhm.
Everything that happens in one particular moment is going to change. So even the remark is going to change. Even that person's actions are going to change.
Mhm.
And I think coming from that awareness, you start to just let things go, and you realize that actually life is just to be experienced. I don't need to hold on to anything. And, please don't get me wrong, like some things are going to hurt,
Right.
especially from that moment where you take it as a reflection of yourself. But then I suppose what I try to do, and I think it's very hard to tell someone like, in a moment, if someone offends you, just close your eyes and go back to source because it's very difficult. It's very difficult. We're constantly obscured by our past conditioning. And if you've been through something very traumatic, it can
Mhm.
be very difficult to return back to that source.
Yeah.
Like when you tell someone to, even meditation, I know we were speaking before the
Yeah.
interview, and I don't know if you experienced the same thing, but I remember when I first started meditating and I closed my eyes and I was just like, right, okay, what am I supposed to be seeing things? Like,
Yeah.
I just couldn't stop thinking. And I was thinking I'm meditating. Within 10 seconds, I was thinking about my dinner because thoughts just continually come and go. And it's very difficult to move beyond thoughts.
Mhm.
But what I would say to people, and I know it's much easier said than done, is that you have a stream of thoughts, right? So a thought happens, a thought happens, a thought happens. And between those thoughts, there's this tiny, tiny gap. And within that gap, people can say it's pure silence, it's a reflection of divinity. But within that gap, there's this opportunity to be without thought.
Mhm.
If you can try and tap into that, you will start to feel this peace kind of evade your body, this stillness, this bliss. And the longer you can hold it, the more you can access it. And then suddenly you just start to let go because you realize that all that other stuff is just fluff that's happening around you. It's just decorative.
Mhm.
But deep within yourself, there's this stillness, this silence, and what I like to call love that's existing and it's always there. I write books and sometimes I'm talking about things beyond mind. Yet I'm trying to use my mind to describe those things. I'm trying to use language, which is a manifestation of the physical world, to describe something that's beyond.
On physical.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's almost like this subjective awareness that I'm trying to put down onto paper. And that can be very, very difficult. But the best way I can explain it to you is that there's that gap of silence between two thoughts. And within that gap, there's everything you need to know about yourself. And if you can try and access that, I know it's much easier said than done. You will start to realize that you are this steady, unchanging ball of light and it's
Mhm.
always there. And in those moments where you kind of lose that connection, you can even think about that ball of light or that experience that you've had. And sometimes it just leads you back towards it.
Yeah. Yeah, you said a couple things, but you said something that I've always felt. I actually never researched it, but I'm just so glad you confirmed. I'm sure you researched it, that there is space in between those thoughts.
Right.
Because I lived in New York for 6 years. And when you're going to the train in the morning, I know that these people are not aware that there's space in between their thoughts. You can tell, you can tell. And you're right. When I first started meditating, it was just like I was actually imagining myself meditating in my head, like
Yeah.
me sitting in a field meditating when I'm actually doing the thing. It was like so weird. But now I can meditate and I can drop into my meditation. Or, sometimes my meditations are just like, I love you because I feel like I need to say that to myself. And there was something else that you said. It was external versus internal. I'll tell you, if someone says something to me now and I know it's not true about myself, it's like water off my back,
Mm,
in a
mm,
sense, because I know it's not true, but it's because of the work that I've done and the work that you've probably done as well. So if someone leaves a negative comment on your page, you don't take it to heart in a sense, as you may have done in childhood. And that just comes with practice, right? And I think that we're both creating an internal world for ourselves, a
mm,
world where it feels like a sacred space that really nobody is kind of allowed in that space. It's a space that I go into when I meditate. It's a space that I go into when I pray. It's separate from my relationship with my parents and my relationship with anybody externally. It's separate from the relationship that I have with things in my home or social media. It's a sacred space inside of me. I think that that's the place that I drop into when I meditate. And that's the place where that ball of light that you're talking about probably exists. Do you feel that that's the same thing for you?
Yeah, I would say so. And with the meditation stuff, So I'm just going to tell you a random story about,
Sure.
that my teachers told me. So we talk about meditation a lot. Um, and a few years ago, I said to my teacher that how I feel in meditation, sometimes I don't want to leave that place because it just feels so nourishing.
Mm.
And I was just like, how do I carry that out into the physical world? I don't quite get it. We're having these deep conversations. And he said to me that there were people in his monastery, other monks,
Mhm.
and every single day they would sit in meditation, right? And the whole idea of meditation is to cultivate this inner peace. There was like one day where they had to do some kind of offerings or something. So the monks couldn't meditate that day.
Mhm.
And he said half of the monks lost their cool, like they just didn't know what to do. They were like, oh my God, I'm not going to meditate. And he was completely shocked because in that moment, you're seeing the true effects of meditation. Like meditation is supposed to return you to this kind of this inner peace within yourself. And in one moment where they're not allowed to meditate, they're absolutely like losing their cool. So there was two things. There was that one that they were attached to the practice,
Mhm.
but he thought to himself, are they actually even meditating or are they just sitting in the practice of meditation?
Mhm.
That is, they go to their meditation chairs and they sit down and they meditate every single day and they
Mhm.
tell themselves they're going to meditate, but are they actually meditating? So he basically told me you should always have the intention to meditate if that's what you want to do, if you want to meditate. But he said, as you sit down to meditate and close your eyes, he said, don't tell yourself, I want to meditate. Because when you tell yourself you want to meditate, you're keeping your ego alive
Mhm.
because your thoughts are going in, there's thoughts in your head that are going through telling you that I need to meditate, I want to meditate. And the more you talk, the more inner chatter you create,
Mhm.
and the harder it is for you to move beyond the mind. So
Mhm.
he said, a lot of meditation can happen in spontaneous moments. But he said, follow the breath and then just see, just follow the journey. And if you find yourself attaching to a thought, realize that you are not the thought, let it go. And again, realign with the breath and use the breath to almost like pace yourself back in. And to me, that really changed everything with my meditation. Like, I feel exactly like what you said is these days, I just close my eyes and there might be something that comes up. It might be like, what was the football score yesterday or something? It might be something really random. And then it's just without me even knowing, you drop into it. And then sometimes there might be a thought that surfaces. And I think when I look at my meditation 10 years ago and my meditation now, there's such a big difference with it.
Mhm.
And people always tell me, Vex, why don't you teach meditation? And I don't call myself a meditation teacher. I said I'm just a meditator. I'm not really a meditation teacher, but I find it difficult to teach people how to experience that because
Mhm.
I'm doing it so spontaneously now.
Mhm.
Like I've gone through the whole journey of closing your eyes. I've done guided meditations and all of that stuff helped, especially to bring some kind of inner calm.
Right.
But to get to this feeling of interconnectedness, I think has taken me the best part of 10 years to get to that place.
Yeah.
And I think you explained it so beautifully. Is this just this drop? And it's like you just sink in. And what I experienced in that moment, I can't put in words. And it's so strange as a writer. I find it so difficult to talk about that aspect of my journey. I can talk about the psychology of stuff. I can talk about how to handle difficult people,
Mhm.
toxic family members. I can talk about things that you can do in practice. But when it comes to that experience that I have through meditation, I find it extremely hard. But the premise of my latest book, Closer to Love, is to try to return to that place of wholeness. And I think that's what true self-love is to me,
Mhm.
is is to return to that place of wholeness. And then when you go out into your life, you make decisions and take actions from that
That
place of
place.
wholeness. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. I think I agree with you. When you talk about people ask you to teach them meditation, people ask me to meditate with them. They don't ask me to teach, probably because you're like way ahead in the process. But but I always say to them, I think that with meditation, it's really you becoming the scientist of yourself on the mat,
Mm,
right? And that is something that I can't do for somebody else. That is
mm,
something you can't do for someone else. that's something that they have to do every single time they sit on that mat. They become more familiar with themselves, like a scientist would, right? Like take a
Yeah.
magnifying glass to some of these feelings that they're feeling. And
Mm.
I think that is where you cultivate that love. Your book, it like eases you into finding yourself back to that place. It tells you, hey, maybe you want to like go to the right here a little bit and look and see what's going on, you know? So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I felt with your book. It was just like, here's what worked for me. Here's a suggestion. Here's a story of me and Kaushal, easing you into the idea of love and also the idea of self love through external love. Because I learned a lot listening to your story with Kaushal. You talked about right before you met her, you were also in a dark place in your life and a place of transformation as well. Can you talk a little bit about that time?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it wasn't the best time, if I'll be completely honest with you. You know what's interesting is during that time, just before I met Koshal, I was in a very dark place. I was experiencing multiple hardships at the same time. And this is weird to say. I was on this journey of like positivity, right? But it was inauthentic positivity. That's the best way to put it. It was a lot of suppression to appear positive. And that is obviously very unhealthy. And I found out the hard way. So I get to a point in my life and I just want to give up. I want to exit the world. I'm like, what is the point of me being here? I see no purpose behind my life. I've got all these big dreams. I'm so far from these dreams. All I'm seeing is the same old story in my life. It's heartbreaking. I just moved on from a partner at that point, and I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was meant for. And then I'd witnessed my mum struggling her whole life. And then I had my two older sisters that I wanted to take care of, but I felt too emotionally immature to do that. And I just thought, oh, maybe I'm a burden in this world. Maybe I'm making life difficult for people. So I attempted at least to, and trigger warning here,
Yeah.
to exit the world. Unfortunately, I didn't. I'm obviously I'm still here, but in that moment that I survived, I said to myself, "Hey, the fact that I'm still here means that there must be something for me.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I shouldn't be here. After what I've just done, I shouldn't really be here. Someone wants me here. Something wants me here."
Mhm.
And I wasn't religious or anything really at the time. I was born into a Hindu family, but it was just kind of like my mum tells me what to do, and I just do it without really knowing why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Right.
Um, so it wasn't like I was really religious or anything. But in that moment as well, I said to myself, like, I thought I'm a burden to people, but if I had left this world, my mum had worked for her whole life to see her kids happy and to support us. And
Mhm.
in that moment, if I had left the world, she would have felt like not only a failure, but like she would have lost her purpose.
Yeah.
And that would have been an even bigger burden to leave. And I got this sense of clarity. And then I said to myself, I never want to return back to this space ever again. Like, I need to do something. I need to do it the right way. There must be a better way. It can't just be force yourself to think positive when you've got all this trauma. Trauma is a massive thing at the moment on the internet. I've gone through stuff and it's very evident. But what has that meant for me in my life and for my identity? And that's when I started to turn to self love. And
Mhm.
again, I didn't know what self love meant. Like, if you go on the internet back then, anyway, you type in self love, it will be like stand in front of a mirror and tell yourself you love yourself. And that might be a part of it. Mirror work could be a part of it. Affirmations could be a part of it. But I knew there was something deeper to that. And I had to go on that journey and I had to start it. And I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't date a girl for like
Mm.
forever, I think, after that. But also that I would attend to my own needs. And as I started attending to my own needs, I naturally started talking to Koshal, and she told me she'd just gone through a massive heartbreak and she was with someone for a very long time and she was trying to find her way back to herself as well. And we were both on this journey of self-love individually.
Mhm.
Um, and it just came into alignment. And then there was the funniest thing is we discovered that we went to the same school. I was in the year above her, but we don't really remember each other that well. I just remember one moment and a glimpse of her. But again, I was so young. And I was like, wow, the universe does work in, like, it works in weird ways. But we've been together for 14 years. So we've been together for a long time, and we've just been on this journey, and we've shifted and we've changed. And the man that she met back then, although he was on a journey of self-love, it's not the same version of me that she's receiving right now. And
Mhm.
vice versa, there's a different version. And we just stay open to loving those new versions
Mhm.
of each other. But I think when I especially break closer to love, and I start with the story of me and Koshal, just
Mhm.
to, especially for someone that's been heartbroken, just to give them that kind of ounce of hope sometimes, because I think that's all you need, is that when you really do return to yourself, that you start to align to people and things that resonate with that place of wholeness.
Mhm.
Suddenly, you're not trying to use people and things to fill these voids within yourself.
Mhm.
And I think it's so important. And that's why self love does get a bad rep these days, but it's because it's just not understood in its fullness. And
Yeah.
that's what I try to do throughout my work.
Yeah, yeah. And I felt that too when I was reading that story. You talk about the thread that connected you. And I feel like nowadays, just looking around with dating apps and everything that's going on, I feel like a lot of people's spirits are just kind of broken in a sense. I feel like people have lost hope. I hear it all the time. And I
Mm,
think that that story is really valuable because it does give you hope. Like, maybe life is happening for you, right? Like when you hear your
yeah,
story and how you guys met in school and she moved and then she had to come back because of her dad and stuff like that. Maybe life is happening for you. Just kind of hold on, harness your own self love and work on yourself. And I think that's also why, like, the title of your book, Good Vibes, Good Life.
yeah.
I'm from Barbados and we talk about vibes all the time in the Caribbean. We're like,
Amazing. Amazing.
yeah, we're like, if the vibes are not good, we're not going somewhere. If this person's vibes are not good, we're not hanging out with them. That's just
Yeah.
kind of our island philosophy in general.
Yeah.
And so I love the name of your book because you spend your life with yourself, is what I tell myself every single day. When I'm washing my dishes, sometimes I'm like, oh, how can you be more connected to this moment? Because I'm also living with myself and not by myself. And
Right.
I'm always like, how can I be more connected to this act? How can I be
Yeah.
more connected when I'm walking on the trail in the evening to the trees and to the flowers and to the birds that I hear, to the clouds in the sky? All of those things, I think, are all small ways too that if you're not on the mat meditating, you're also creating that ball of love that you talk about within
Mhm.
yourself. When I hear you and watch you here, you might as well be like a guy that has a white beard, because that's, I think, the level of wisdom, if you will, the complex thoughts that we're talking about. You might as well be like some sage somewhere in a cave, like talking about these things. Where did you find the courage? I think it requires bravery
Mm,
to forge this path for yourself and to really believe in your dreams in a time where you said you were suffering and you were going through periods of transformation and you were creating love within yourself. Where did you, beyond all of that, find the bravery and the courage and self belief and self love to write your books and to share your message?
so I'm gonna, and some of this is gonna sound woo woo. So I'm just giving you.
Oh, no. I'm all about woo woo. I got some
Okay,
crystals and all kinds of things happening right here.
that's good.
So we're
That's good.
good.
um, when I was younger, I said to myself, because of all the pain that I was experiencing, and this is before I started writing books or anything like that. Um, and before I knew what I was going to become, is my mum had decided I should be a doctor. So in my head, I was like, I'll become a doctor, but
Yeah.
I'm also going to write a book one day. And I just said to myself, and I still remember this, at maybe like 5 years old, I said to myself, I need to get out of this. I'm gonna be really successful and happy, and then I'm gonna write a book about it one day.
Mm.
I want to do that. And I put that out there when I was like 5 years old. And in my head, I was just like, but that will happen when I'm like maybe over 60 years old, and I'm probably just going to be chilling under a tree, meditating all day. Like, that was a vibe that I thought was going to play out. And then in my teenage years, I remember just looking around and there was like all this violence happening around me. And I remember talking to my friends that were in the same state, and I was just like, guys, we need to dream bigger. We need to do something more epic. Like there must be more to life than this. And they were like, no, this is it. All they knew was suffering. So they were like, this is life for us. You just got to accept it. Like, and then some of them were like religious. So they're like, God gives us these experiences for a reason. And,
Mhm.
God doesn't want us to be wealthy or
Or he's
happy.
testing you or whatever.
Yeah. And all that stuff. And I didn't quite like that answer in
Yeah.
that moment. So you're basically saying I don't have any influence over my reality.
Mhm.
And because I didn't like that, I went on my own kind of path. I started I don't know if you've heard this when you were doing your research, but I grew up on a lot of rap and hip hop music, and I used to go on this forum. And in the forum, they had like a sub forum where you talk about life, philosophy, and spirituality, neuroscience, and that really intrigued me. And there was a book that everyone was talking about, and they were like, "This book's changed Bruce Lee's life." And I was a martial arts fan at the same time, so I was just
Mhm.
like, "I need to read this book." And when I obtained a copy of this book through LimeWire, it started to give me faith that there was something better out there for me. And
Mhm.
that really put me on this path of like positivity and changing your mindset. And then I was really into sports. I started studying my favorite athletes and their mindsets. And then I would wait until the rich list got published and I would look at all the people in the top 10. And I think there was one point where three of the people in the top 10 were orphans. And I was just like, subjective, they've had probably worse kind of lives than I have. Like they've
Mhm.
experienced
Mhm.
potentially more hardships, yet they've made such huge successes of
Yeah.
themselves. What are they doing different to everyone else? And that really started building up my faith. At the same time, people would always come to me for advice. And I didn't have much. I didn't have money to lend them. I didn't have much to give them, but people would always come to me for advice.
Mhm.
And it was really strange that I was so good. And I think everyone's like this. Everyone's good at giving advice, but not taking their own
Yeah,
advice.
right.
But there was just something there that I was always giving advice to people, and I was always experiencing really weird supernatural stuff. It was very hard to explain. Like there was maybe like a calling somewhere, and I was very intrigued by these kind of spiritual experiences that I was having, but I just didn't want to believe them. I just found
Mhm.
them like super, super freaky, and I didn't
Mhm.
want to go down that rabbit hole. And then I remember when I was at university and I was in a bookstore and looking at books, and then this woman just like she touched my shoulder and she said, "You're really close to God and you've got this message to share. Make sure you share it with the world." And in that moment, I was just like, "This woman's on something. Like,
Yeah,
I need to get away," because again, it just
yeah.
I was so freaked out by it. And I used to have quotes all over my wall at university in my room. And I always used to tell my friend, I was like, "Oh, one day I hope like people will quote me and I'll make something of my life
Mhm.
and I'll inspire other people." And I've always wanted to inspire. Like when I was inspiring people or like giving them advice, I felt so alive. I felt like it was like I was supposed to be doing that. But
Mhm.
I was never, there was no job or opportunity in that. My mom thinks I'm going to become a doctor, not a person that writes quotes. It's like,
Right, right, right.
there was nothing in that. And then at university, I remember there was this experience where we had to keep a personal diary. And me being someone that was really into clubs and drinking back then, I never really used to do these assignments. I remember we had to hand this assignment in on like a Friday and I'd gone out on the Thursday night. And then as soon as I got back, I tried to, quickly write a diary and you had to like answer certain questions, like how did you feel in certain moments? And, what things were you thinking? And I just handed it in. And then my tutor called me and I was just like, okay, I'm in trouble because he knows that I just wrote it like literally a few hours ago. And he was just like, there's something really special about your writing. Like you just know how to connect people to emotions. And he
Mhm.
said, have you ever thought about maybe writing research papers in the future? And I was
Mhm.
just like, it's never come into my mind. Never
Mhm.
come into my mind at all. But I had written poetry. So when I was younger, I used to write poetry based
Mhm.
on so I was inspired by Tupac's poetry book. That was one of the first books I actually picked up. But I never used to tell my friends I was writing poetry
Mhm.
because if I went into school, especially in that era, and I told my friends I was writing poetry, like I would be excluded. Like it'd be
Yeah.
like, "Well, you're not a true man. Like you're writing poetry." So it was something I kept to myself. So I was always writing anyway, and I was always journaling, and I'd always write down all these feelings and thoughts on paper. And I used to ghostwrite rap lyrics for my friends. I was always writing and stuff, but again, I wasn't connecting the dots. And now, the reason I'm telling you all this is because I was in a corporate job, and I was in a very secure good corporate job. But I always felt like I was meant for more. I didn't quite want to do what I was doing.
Mhm.
And I used to get the train. So I used to commute to work, and I used to get the train to work. And basically, every time I finished work, I'd go down some stairs and there'd be a platform that the train would come to.
Mhm.
And I would always walk down towards the left side of the platform because there'd be less people there. And then I'm guaranteed a seat when the train would come. And so I walked down to that side of the platform, and there was a bunch of people there. And suddenly, all these people just moved away from me. And in my head, I thought, is there like body odor or something? Like, am I scaring people off? But
Yeah.
have they suddenly all shifted? And I was all by myself, and everyone was like far in the distance. And it was almost like I wasn't quite there, but I was. And then this woman appeared out of nowhere, and she was a little bit shorter than me. I wasn't quite sure about her ethnicity. It's like maybe Middle Eastern or something. And she started talking to me, and I've always, I always welcome people with kindness. And
Right.
even then, like, I didn't want to tell her to go away, but
Yeah.
just talking to me, and she was like, have you ever thought about past lives? And I was just like, well, my mum believes in reincarnation and stuff, but I don't really
Mhm.
follow anything like that. And
Mhm.
she told me this like crazy story about my past life. She was like, this is who you were. This is what you're meant for. These are your challenges in this life. And then she said the same thing as that woman said at university, is
Mhm.
that you have a message to share with the world, and you're going to change the world with that message. But you need to believe in yourself. You need to tame your anger, because I used to have anger issues as a child, and she somehow knew that. She said, once you get past that and really know yourself and know that God exists within you
Mhm.
and you're a reflection of God, she said, your message is going to reach so many people and help people, but that is your purpose in this life. And it sounded great. When you're hearing all that, you're like, wow, this woman's really bigging me up like this. But I was still skeptical. I was just like, I've got no reason to believe this. But it sounds great. And then she knew I was a bit skeptical. And then the train started approaching the platform. So I was just like, look, it's been great talking to you, but I need to
Mhm.
get on the train now.
Mhm.
And she said, you don't have to believe anything I'm saying. And she said my name. And I wasn't like on the internet as such. I didn't have Instagram wasn't around then. She wouldn't have known who I was.
Mm.
She was way older than me. I was this young guy in a corporate job. She has no connection to me. Like, she's not like long lost family or anything like that. And
Mhm.
she said my name, and literally my hairs on my arm just stood up. And I got on the train, and I turned around as the door was closing, and she was gone. And I looked around and I was trying to calculate, because it's really fond of mathematics. And I was trying to calculate the distance and what pace she was walking at and how long it would have taken her to get around the corner. I was just like, there's no way she could have just disappeared. So
Yeah.
then I just imagine all of that. And I just started seeing Kosher at the time. And I
Mhm.
remember texting her, and I was like, I've got to tell you this crazy story. But I just feel like there's something in this. Why does everything in my life keep pointing me towards helping people? And how can I help people when I don't even feel like I have much, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was just very weird. And I remember going to sleep, nights after, and I would stay awake, and I was just like, there's something to this. And at the same time, I was seeing like angel numbers. I don't know if you believe in angel
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
There wasn't much on angel numbers at the time. And this is strange now. This can't be a coincidence. I can't explain this. I can't explain all these experiences. And even my mum, she was religious. And I remember she went to a religious event, and I think someone channeled an energy of some kind of like higher being or something, right? And
Yeah.
again, that higher being told my mum that I was, and I've never met this
Oh
person in
my
my life.
God.
So and then my mum came, and she was just like, and my mum knows me as this naughty, cheeky kid. And she
Yeah.
was,
Right.
why do people keep saying this? And I was just like, you tell me, I have no idea. But it just kept playing on my mind. And I got all these notes out and the things I had written. And I was just like, I think I need to start sharing this with the world. And I didn't share it under like Vex King, because I thought people wouldn't take me seriously. Like, even now, people hear me speak. Sometimes people think I'm like very old until they see my picture. They like think I'm like this much older guy, and then they see me. They're like, "Oh, you're young," and I'm like, "Well, I'm 36. Maybe I look a little bit younger than I
Yeah.
am, but." I am of age as such, but I thought people wouldn't take me seriously. And I have like my ears pierced, I have tattoos on me.
Yeah.
Maybe the image will not let my message reach people. So I did things on different accounts. And I remember, so I was on Instagram in like 2013 or 14 under different accounts, and they all got loads of followers, loads of celebrities, but no one knew I was behind these pages that was sharing all this wisdom.
Mm.
And I've been doing it for years. Like literally, there's one point I had 50 social media accounts,
Oh my
different
God.
pages. Called
Yeah.
Good Vibes Only. One was called Wealthy Words, and they were followed by loads of people. And then my wife, she said, you're helping so many people, but no one knows it's you. I really think people will connect with you if you
Mhm.
just show people who you are and just be you.
Mhm.
So I did that, and then the Vex King account was born, and I would speak on a lot of taboo topics as well, like the brown culture, the pressures of women being told they need to be married by a certain age, or their
Yeah.
failures, and all of that kind of stuff. And people, these were topics that were considered taboo, I suppose, at the time. And I was bringing them to light. And then a literary agent saw that I was making an impact on my audience.
Mhm.
And she was just like, have you ever thought about writing a book? But what she didn't realize was that I would get asked questions every single day, and I would make note of all those questions. And I was already working on a book to answer those questions. But
Mhm.
I realized that the way social media was, attention spans were very small now.
Mhm.
People wanted the epiphany or the aha moment like right away.
Right.
And we're in this world of TikTok and Instagram, just scrolling, and even dating now. You're just scrolling, tapping
Scrolling
like
swipe. Yeah.
it's just like that. And I was just like, people just want things quickly. So I've read all these books, like the 1,000 self-help spirituality books. I do meditation. Like, how can I talk about these truths in a way that feels really light?
Mhm.
And that gave birth to my first book, Good Vibes, Good Life. And then I was just like, I want to take them on this journey towards unconditional love, towards this kind of true essence that everyone has. But how
Mhm.
do I do that in a way that doesn't feel too overwhelming, that doesn't tell you to sign up to some kind of dogmatic belief system,
Right.
that doesn't impose any rules? Because to be honest, and one of my teacher actually said this to me, and this is the reason I've got so much respect for him. Sometimes we'll read through certain scriptures, especially like from the Upanishads.
Yeah.
He said, this isn't your wisdom, though. For it to be your wisdom, you have to go and prove it right. But to be able to prove it right, you have to try and prove it wrong. So he
Mhm.
said, if you now go on your Instagram page and start talking about stuff in the Upanishads, like that's your reality,
Yeah.
all you're doing is almost like you're describing how wine tastes, having never tasted it based on what you've read. Right?
Mhm.
There's not the experiential wisdom that
Mhm.
you've got. So that's what I try to do. I'm going through my own journey, and when you read, because you've read Closer to Love first, you'll read Good Vibes, Good Life, and you'll probably get through that book very quickly, and you'll
Yeah.
probably be like, I'm quite well versed in this, right? But that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to take people along this journey, and it's the same journey that I've gone on myself. But I just
Mhm.
want it to be really accessible and easy to digest. But the courage really is just it's come from this calling that I feel like I personally don't feel like I've chosen this path. I feel like it's chosen me, and it was
Mhm.
constantly choosing me throughout my life. And
Mhm.
that's why I do things with so much integrity and love, because I take it on as a responsibility now. For me, it's people trusting in me,
Mm.
and to be able to lead, I have to be in a good place myself.
Mhm.
So I constantly work on myself every single day, whether it's through meditation or something else. But the courage is really driven by that passion to want to help people and just leave the world a little bit better than I
Better.
found it.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard a conversation with Oprah and Glennon Doyle. I don't know if you know, well, you know
Yeah.
Oprah, but she was talking about Oprah's life, and Oprah's mother had recently passed, and Glennon had wrote her this letter. And in the letter, it said, when your mom is looking down on earth, I bet she must just see all these little lights everywhere. And Oprah was
Mm,
like, why? And she said, because that's all the people that you have touched, right? Like that you've shifted just a little bit of their consciousness, or you've shifted something in their heart or their life. And she's like, man, the whole world must be lit up. And
mm,
I think about that when I think about how you've been so obedient to your calling, right? Like, I was born in Barbados. We have never met, although I feel like you could be a brother from another mother. But here we are, right? Having this conversation because you wrote this book and it shifted something in me. And now there's a little light in me. And I know you have over 1 million followers on just your Instagram account and many more across all your different accounts. And I think that's probably true for you too. Like, there's probably all these little lights, like when your dad's looking down, he's a part of that. And it's
Uh,
also a part of your calling.
uh,
Um,
Thank you. I
yeah.
really appreciate that. I remember when I released Good Vibes, Good Life, and you'll be able to scroll down and you'll see it. I announced the book and I wrote a long message as I usually do. And I said in the message, I said, as an author, like having a title like in the UK, we have Sunday Times bestseller or New York Times
Yeah.
bestseller or
Yeah.
selling a bunch of copies and the metrics. And you know how even on Instagram, people feel like that with algorithms and stuff. Like, all of that stuff makes you feel good. But I actually wrote in that post that if I can just make one person's life a little bit lighter, like that book has served its purpose
Hmm.
because it's such a powerful thing. So many people are focused on numbers. And there's so many people nowadays as well that are focused on changing the world. But, it starts at home. It starts with yourself
Hmm.
to begin with, being
Hmm.
gentle and having compassion with yourself and the old self and forgiving yourself for not having awareness in certain situations that we're all on this evolutionary journey. But then extending that out to your neighbors, to your family, to your friends. People are trying to jump to this goal way far ahead and they're trying to validate themselves through numbers. I've touched 1 million people. Now I want to reach 10 million. Now I want to reach 1 billion. And that makes them feel worthy. But
Hmm.
let's just start one life at a time and
Yeah.
let that life first be your own life.
Yeah.
And going back to the love, I always compare it to the sun. And I touched on this earlier. And the sun can only brighten things up.
Hmm.
Like the sun will shine down on rubbish, but the sun doesn't suddenly become rubbish. The sun will shine down on palaces, but the sun doesn't become royal.
Hmm.
But what the sun does, it illuminates all the things around us. And as human beings, it lets us appreciate all those things. The sun shines on a loved one's face, and suddenly we're staring at their eyes, and we've got this deep, profound gratitude for their existence.
Hmm.
And that's what love does as well. When love is true and you can really return to that source, love doesn't hurt. Love, it illuminates the world around us. And I'm by no means a guru, and sometimes I'll go on an interview, like on TV, and they will say Instagram guru, or they call me a teacher or something. And I always consider myself a student. But I'm just trying to I'm trying to work from that heart space, that place
Hmm.
of love.
Hmm.
And I really believe that what comes from the heart also goes to the heart and it reaches other people's hearts as well. And
Hmm.
that's why I try to embody in my work, is trying to work from this authentic place within myself. Because I know if I can do that, then hopefully I can connect with maybe not everyone, but who the message is meant for.
Hmm. And I read or I heard, I listened. It was one of the two. I feel like I've been hearing you also for 2 weeks straight. That you prayed before every line, that like let it like reach people. And I think that you do feel that energy when you read the book. You do feel that energy when I listen to you. I feel that energy emanating from you. And I think that the people externally that follow you and that resonate with your words are part of your legacy that you're leaving. And I think we're all really glad that you are obedient to that calling. Thank you so much for spending what is, I feel like, an hour now with me and talking about these really complex subject matters and everything that you've said. I think your book, Closer to Love, is a great way to start figuring out how to harness that love within yourself and figure out who you are
Mm,
beyond everything else externally. Who are you? I really, really appreciate you spending this time and talking through all these small little nuances and sharing stories. And I feel
yeah.
like I got a lot out of this conversation too, learning more about myself and learning about someone that has a similar experience. When I have these conversations, this is where my cells like tingle. Like that's how I know this is for me.
I learned a lot too as well. And I feel like even though like you were asking me the questions, there was a lot to learn from your responses as well. There was a lot of clarity that you provided as well. I feel like whoever listens to the podcast will hopefully take some value away. And I feel like it's good because it won't sound preachy, hopefully. Like we're not
No,
saying
no,
do these
not at
10
all.
things. This is a very honest conversation. It's been a pleasure. So
Is
thank you. Thank you so
yes,
much.
thank you. Thank you. And have a great rest of the night.